Hampshire College astronomer Dr. Salman Hameed, Mr. Universe. We just had Academy Award nominated filmmaker John Sayles on the air and announced that he's going to be doing an event at the Shea coming up later in April. But there is more exciting film happening in our area. You, apart from being an astronomer, are on the board of the wonderful Amherst Cinema in downtown Amherst. And tomorrow, coordinated with theaters all across the country, is the National Evening of Science on Screen.
Yes, and before I say anything further, John Sayles. I mean, he's amazing.
Isn't he?
He's really fantastic. And if, again, if you haven't seen his films, if nothing else, check out Lone Star.
Love Lone Star.
It's absolutely amazing. But all of his films are really cool. Like, the real independent filmmaker. He writes, edits, everything he does it himself, and they're very thoughtful films. So, 2 thumbs up for John Sayles. But, yes, so Sloan Foundation has been funding Science on Screen, in which they partner with many of the organizations that show films, for example, Amherst Cinema, and they bring in a film, or people bring in film, and they have somebody who talks about it as well. And of course, that theme has to be about science. And
yes. Are you that someone?
What? Okay, yes. So tomorrow, March 28th, is not just a Science on Screen, but it's National Evening of Science on Screen, meaning to say there are 24 film organizations across the US, all the way from California to Massachusetts, who are going to be having an evening where they're going to be showing a film, science-themed, and then pairing it with someone like me in this particular case.
So what's the film that Amherst Cinema is going to show tomorrow night?
Okay, so tomorrow there is we are showing the film After Yang. This came out I think I saw it early last year, 2022. It's a fantastic film. It's directed by a Korean American director, Kogonada, and he's a fascinating guy. So I'm going to talk about him because the way his films are, they actually go and talk about experiences of identity, because he himself has sort of in some ways 2 identities, and they're Korean and American. This particular film has Colin Farrell in it, and from last year's stuff, if you remember Banshees of Inisherin, he was fantastic.
He's the one who kept all his fingers.
Oh, great, a spoiler in there. But he's also really amazing in After Yang. This movie is in the tradition of thoughtful, slow science fiction. So it's a slow burner. So if you are looking for example, action-packed, bam, bam, aliens and things like that, no. Mm-hmm. This movie is not like that. But if you are looking for grappling with deeper questions about what makes us human, what makes us who we are, I think then it is there. The premise of the film is that you are sometime in the future, we don't know exactly when, something has happened. We are in a post-apocalyptic world. So that's actually really subtle. Kogonada, he's the director. That's not his actual name, but in fact, this is an homage to a screenwriter for a famous Japanese director, Ozu Yosujiro. And so, but he really used his screenwriter's name to use himself, as sort of identifying himself as that director. And this particular film, he talks about that when he thinks about post-apocalypse, what his attention goes to, forget about the main players, forget about all of these things, but what is happening to ordinary people? That's where the real stories lie. Mm-hmm. And so in this movie, something has happened, we don't know what, but now we are living in this world which is a little off, but there is also a lot of nature around it. It seems like, so you have interesting architecture where you have trees growing in places where you don't expect, and you seem to be living in harmony with nature, but there is also something off about it because everything is very neat and clean. Mm-hmm. So there is something unsettling because everything is very sterilized, but it's also with nature. So architecture is really important. Koganada's earlier film is Columbus, which is about Columbus, Ohio, and actually there is this, really it's about emotions and architecture. That's also a very thoughtful film. So if you haven't checked out, do check that out. But in After Yang, the premise is in this future, Colin Farrell, who's white, he has his wife who's black, and they have a kid who is Asian and who has been adopted. And it was a young kid, young girl. And apparently in this time, you can actually have robots that can be caretakers. And you can get robots that can specifically talk about culture. So they have an Asian robot who actually can provide sort of like cultural knowledge to this little girl because she's originally from, or she was adopted from China.
Well, let me stop you right there. There was a great article in the New York Times yesterday, well, great and somewhat chilling, about Italy and how elderly people in Italy are being cared for by AI robots that are like quizzing them and trying to make sure that they're staying mentally sharp, but using very Italian, culturally appropriate kind of questions. So this After Yang model is actually happening right now.
And this is one of those wonderful things about this particular film, After Yang, is that, so it takes that, where oftentimes when we think about robots, we think that the main question is, oh, is the robot like human or not? And the robot also oftentimes in films like Terminator or other films like, they want to be like human, right?
Or they want to come kill us.
Or they want to kill us, but also sort of like the higher standard is more like Data, for example, in Star Trek, wanted to be human, right? Like, and whether they would do or not, that's a whole separate thing. Here, in many ways, it actually talks about, actually doesn't care. And in fact, why do you want to be more like human? And that is an embedded message in there. But rather, the robot's question is whether it can be Asian or not. And that's an interesting twist to that. And then there is a really thoughtful conversation about, there is issues, not issues, but conversations about adoptions. But a lot of it is about your identity. And so as myself, an immigrant from Pakistan, it really resonated with me because here is a case where how do you think when you move from one place to another, you lose a lot of things. And again, oftentimes when movies deal with immigrant experiences, a lot of it is about the loss. Or it's about the gain, like, hey, I have adopted, this is a new country and so on and so forth. But in reality, things are somewhere in the middle. And that is what this movie deals with. And I can attest to that. When I moved here, and I've been here for over 32 years, I came here for my undergraduate. And right in the beginning, it was very hard. Everything was different. And I still miss things over there, especially I grew up in Karachi, so I miss sort of like, those evening smells. I grew up near the ocean over there, so there is a particular nostalgia about the smells of that particular ocean. Hey, you don't even see many stars in Karachi because of light pollution, but I love seeing those few stars. I actually have a nostalgia for a really light polluted sky because I'm like, if I can only see 3 stars, I'm like, oh yeah, that reminds me of Karachi, right? And of course you have smells of food and other things. And so I still miss that. Talking about cricket, for example, of course, if I talk to you, it's like, it's not going to go anywhere, but over there it's the national language almost in that sense. But there is also a lot of gain, meaning to say I've been here for a long time, and there are a lot of things that I've gained from being here in the US, which is also part of the immigration experience and part of the gain, which I would never have done if I had not come here. So this is where this movie deals with that it is in some ways a little bit melancholic, but it also has a positive thing. And the robot, and again, by the way, there is a garbage truck.
Yeah, this is kitchen table astronomy. It's recycling day.
And there is Wookiee under the table.
Wookiee the dog did not like the truck.
So in this film, the robot dies roughly in the beginning, and so, or not dies, but sort of like whatever, like malfunctions. And Colin Farrell's character is trying to fix it because the girl, his daughter, is very attached to the robot. And so these conversations are part of how he is thinking about this question of loss, this question of identity in the context of the robot, right? So I think it really does something wonderful with that. And Kogonada himself actually
The director of After Yang.
The director of After
At
Yang.
Amherst Cinema tomorrow.
He came here to the US when he was very young. I think he was a toddler or something like that. And yet he grapples with these particular questions because, and this is, if you see me, you can say, hey, even if I've been here for 32 years, and yet for some people, just by looking at me, you go like, oh yeah, he's different, right? And same thing, Kogonada also asked this question, that in some ways, you're an American. And yet, people ask this question, but you are an Asian, right? And for me also, they would see sort of like South Asian and things like that, and you ask this question, so where are you originally from, right? So those questions are always there to how to grapple with those. And so that's the film very thoughtfully deals with this balance between the loss and the gain and how it shapes our identity.
Well, it's interesting too because we are now experiencing AI in a way that we haven't been as users of search engines in particular, like Google and Bing and all these other things that are embedding these artificial intelligent characters that we are interacting with. Some of these interactions have been chilling. There was a big story again in the New York Times about using AI and the AI presenting itself with an entire dark identity and falling in love with the user. If you haven't read that article, it's chilling. Does this wrestle with the potential dark aspects of it? Because I think maybe that's a trope that's too easy to go down. Khalees likes to say she believes when the rise of the robots happens, it'll be more like C-3PO and R2-D2, where they're there knowing everything and can kind of be really helpful.
So just one thing, if I can comment on that, but this movie does not go into that direction. But I should say that this is, again, because these kind of ChatGPT stuff are based upon data that is available, you can already see an inherent bias in terms of what kind of information those chatbots have.
Especially if you put them down a direction to come up with a shadow self, they can easily find that information and do it.
But also the reverse, meaning to say that you don't have much information, for example, in Urdu.
Right.
So, for example, if you are trying to figure out what that context is going to be, it's not going to say, I don't know, because it seems like ChatGPT is a man, because it never says, I don't know.
It mansplains it, even if it doesn't know.
But it makes up stuff, right? And so I think there is that inherent stuff. So there is a whole conversation to be had about that. But the movie goes in a different direction. And again, sorry about the little bit of a spoiler, but the movie has to be experienced, and that's the reason I'm okay with talking a little bit about that, because movie deals with what makes you you, and it goes from the direction of potential memories, right? Okay, so what are those memories, and how does it shape your own identity? And I think that's where this immigration experience and memories really become crucial, because, again, to go back to this example, you know me, we've talked, we've known each other for about a dozen years or so, or a little bit more. But you don't know everything about me because I have other aspects of my life which are also in my memory. But that becomes even deeper in terms of immigration experiences, because like people who know me, including my wife, I have a son, he knows me from this context. But I also have a parent, I have my father in Pakistan, and he knows me from that context. Now, there is a loss, because if I were to explain to my son, look who I am, well, that experience of Pakistan makes a sort of really crucial personality for me of how I grew up. But it's very hard to transmit that information. Mm-hmm. And the same thing, I would love for my father to know who I am from spending 32 years here in the US, because that's what shapes who I am. But that is very hard to convey. Mm-hmm. And so there is this inherent, in that context, there is an inherent loss in communicating to somebody who you are in a full picture. And it becomes, and I should mention, it happens to everybody. It's not just the context of immigration, because people are displaced here as well. People have multiple contexts in which their identities are shaped. But I think with immigrant experiences, it even becomes much more acute in that sense. So here in this film, the question is like, who is that robot, right? And you don't think in terms of that thing, but that's the question that the movie is asking, but not in terms of, oh, is the robot like human or not? No, which by the way, the chat GPT questions are related to that thing. The movie is not asking that because the robot itself is not asking this question, doesn't even want to be like human. It is just asking, am I Asian enough? Am I Asian? Which is again a fascinating question. And this experience, I just want to mention sort of like, one small bit. There is this great conversation because Colin Farrell character, I mean, he also has a tea shop. And so this post-utopian, post sort of like apocalypse world is unclear what's going on or what happened really, because you have China connection, sort of like, there is a lot of connection to that and things like that. And of course there is adoption coming in. And he runs this tea place and the robot really asks this, how do you experience tea? And he's trying to explain that of how it is. And then he asks this question, can you taste a place in a teacup? And that is really goes to this question of how do you convey an experience, something that you really goes through, embody you. Can you explain that to somebody else? And I think that is something that would always be missing. And for this robot,
can we turn a robot into a wine snob? That's what we're trying to do all the time when we're tasting wine. We can taste Italy. We just did it on Friday. We can taste Spain. But could we convince a robot to taste those things?
Right. And when you're saying that, did you really experience that, right? And so that was where the sort of like, a little bit of melancholy comes in, like, when the robot realized, like, can you really do that? Can you really experience place in a teacup? And that is what's missing to a certain degree. So all I would say is, well, we've said a lot, but After Yang, if you're looking for a good, thoughtful sci-fi film in the tradition of Moon, for example,
by David Bowie's son,
by David Bowie's and Duncan Jones, or if you're like Solaris or other types of films, I think After Yang is also sort of like, it takes these kind of issues, but and I know you're a huge fan of Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yes.
And the immigration issues are also, or migrant experiences are also central in there. I mean, this is a much quieter.
There's no kung fu in it.
No kung fu in it. Wait a minute, I don't want to spoil it. Like, but towards the no, it's so it's come on over to Amherst Cinema. I also want to say, watch films on the big screen. Especially, sometimes people say, oh, is this movie action-packed film so that you want to see it on the big screen? I would almost say I actually like to go films that are quiet in a theater because, or sort of like, that are mellow because it doesn't distract you. Your focus is all on that. And so I think the value of going to a cinema is amazing. Come to Amherst Cinema. Amherst Cinema is non-profit, membership supported. So if you are local, come over there and also become a member. There are some fantastic events all the time happening. And just a little plug, a month from now, in fact, the next Science on Screen is going to be on The Martian.
Oh.
With Montoya Professor Darby Dyer.
Oh, wow.
So,
who steers the Mars rover on Mars, right? From the JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab?
She has done that, yes. And so Darby Dyer is going to be leading that discussion. So come.
We got to get her on the show.
We definitely will. In fact, before the next Science on Screen. But come to Amherst Cinema, watch the movie on big screen. It's tomorrow, Tuesday at 7 p.m. And in some sense, you'll be part of Science on Screen all over the country.
Hampshire College astronomer Dr. Salman Hameed at your kitchen table in Amherst. Thank you as always.
Thank you very much.